Gospel reading is from Luke chapter 18, verses 9 to 14. He also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and regarded others with contempt. Two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, standing by himself, was praying thus: God, I thank you that I'm not like other people, thieves, rogues, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give a tenth of all my income. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even look up to heaven, but was beating his breast and saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his home justified rather than the other. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, but all who humble themselves will be exalted. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Some of you may have heard or read about the tornadoes that took place in the Dallas area last weekend. In fact, it was last Sunday evening. The storms devastated parts of the city, especially in the heavily populated suburbs of North Dallas. We're talking about a lot of people living very close together. And those storms left about 50,000 residents without power, and damage that to this point has been estimated at around $2 billion. But remarkably, almost miraculous, there were very few injuries and no fatalities. Many have credited the lack of casualties to both the early warning systems in Dallas and to the many shelters that are scattered, that are set up throughout the Dallas area, so that people in automobiles or people in stores or people outside can get to a place of safety. And that seemed to have helped tremendously saving lives in Dallas. When I went to Austin several weeks ago to help my daughter move to a new residence, I noticed that at every rest stop, you may have noticed this if you traveled by in West and Central Texas, every one of those rest stops has the symbol of a tornado over its entrance, signifying that that rest stop is a safe place to shelter from those dangerous storms, the storms that have always plagued West Texas, Central Texas, that area of the country. If we look around us in our own community, maybe we won't see tornado or storm shelters, but we will see shelters. Shelters that are designed to meet different types of emergencies and crises or hazards. Just a few blocks south of us is the Thornhill Lopez Center, which is a shelter for runaway youth or teenagers who are in an abusive situation. And there are people in that shelter, young people in that shelter all the time. Just a few blocks west of us is the Salvation Army's men's shelter. And just a few steps away from us has been our own family asylum shelter, which we are currently in the process of closing because the city now has adequate facilities to accommodate those families who are seeking shelter. But would it surprise you to realize that right now you are sitting in a shelter? Would it surprise you? It certainly would have surprised the religious community in Israel in the first century, because they never thought of the synagogue or the temple in Jerusalem as a place of spiritual shelter. They did not think of it that way. When Jesus of Nazareth taught in the synagogues, when he taught in the temple, these spaces offered anything but sanctuary. Rather, they were places where one's status in the community and one's standing with God were clearly delineated into levels of separation and alienation. We see this alienation vividly illustrated in Jesus' parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector, a parable which undoubtedly reflected the real circumstances of worship in the time of Christ's ministry. Sometimes the parables are kind of expanded allegories, not this one. This kind of thing did happen in the temple. Christ shows us two men sharing worship in the temple, and these two men have lives that could not be farther apart in circumstance or in standing. The Pharisee was part of an elite caste in Israel. Pharisees were men, always been, of wealth and power, and their position in the community was a sign of God's blessing, God's favor upon their lives. The Pharisees wore these beautiful, elaborate clothing, always out in public. And they were given the highest places of honor in both the political and religious culture of Jerusalem. And in the whole country, in the religious culture of Judaism as well. And this took place, and this happened particularly in the temple. The other man, sharing the temple with the righteous Pharisee, is a tax collector, who, for many in Israel, really had no business being in the temple in the first place. They didn't belong there. It was not a place for them to be. You probably already know that tax collectors worked for the hated Roman Empire. And the very nature of their work required bribery and theft. Tax collectors, as you probably know, made their money by extorting those from whom they collected the taxes. There was a basic tax required by the Roman Empire, then whatever else they could get out of the citizens of Israel was theirs to keep. And the righteous of Israel, and almost all the people, were not hesitant to publicly shame or show their scorn toward this despised group of Jewish citizens, which included their assumption that God hated the tax collectors as well. God scorned them, God hated them. The Pharisee, standing by himself, was praying thus: God, I thank you that I am not like other people, thieves, rogues, adulterers, or even lie. This tax collector. That was not a silent prayer. That was not a silent prayer. That was not a prayer in the heart. That was spoken in the temple with the tax collector a few feet away. Now, how would you feel if someone in the church prayed a similar prayer out loud in judgment of you? How would you feel? Christ knows that the Pharisees' prayer was not an exception, but the rule in Jewish worship. And that the prayer accurately reflected how secure the righteous of Israel felt in regard to God's hatred for people that were not like them, like the tax collector, or who they judged as not worthy of God's love. You or I, hearing such a prayer aimed at us, would probably, at least I would, get up and exit the temple in either shame or anger, promising ourselves to never worship there again, or maybe to never worship again. How many people are turned off by the self-righteous and the arrogant? But the tax collector is not focused on the judgment of his peers. The tax collector is focused on the mercy of his God. God, be merciful to me, a sinner. There are two things that people who enter a shelter have in common. They have a great need and they have no other place to go. It's always the case. You don't go to a shelter because you want to. You go there because you have to. You go there because there is no other place to go. Jesus takes these two qualities and transforms them into a new way of understanding God. This is what he says. I tell you, this man, the tax collector, went down to his home justified rather than the other. He won't even say the Pharisee. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all who humble themselves will be exalted. Standing in the temple, the Pharisee simply restated what the community and his religion said about him. That in God's eyes, he simply was better than everyone else. Richer, holier, more powerful. The Pharisee's prayer was not to God. He was praying to himself. And you can hear it. But the tax collector, in humbling himself before God, found sanctuary in the temple, found sanctuary in his religion, found sanctuary in the grace of God. A grace that was neither expected nor understood as essential to the very nature of God until the Messiah hung on the cross and declared, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. That's grace. God was never seen as a God of grace until Jesus came and said those words. Anne Mack, in her book, Traveling Mercies, Some Thoughts on Faith, writes this: Man is born broken. He lives by mending. The grace of God is glue. On this Reformation Sunday, it is important for us just to stop and take a moment to reflect on the sanctuary of grace that God offered to all humanity through the sending of His Son and our Savior, Jesus Christ. The church has often forgotten the power of grace in its own existence as it created through history walls and barriers and fences to faith. In the Middle Ages, much of Christianity had become entangled in the temptations of the state all of its wealth and political power. The Pharisees at that time were those who presented Christianity not as a sanctuary for the broken, not as a sanctuary for the lost, but rather a community of the righteous who would be guaranteed eternal bliss if they just did as they were told by those, by the way, who were empowered by their obeisance. But with Martin Luther, John Calvin, and all the other reformers read the teachings of Jesus Christ, such as the parable of the Pharisee and tax collector, they realized that there was a sanctuary, a shelter within the church, a shelter that would reform everything about how and why we worship and where our worship should lead us in our lives and in the kingdom to come. Because of their courage, we live this morning in this shelter of grace. Not a building with pews and walls, but a place in our hearts where we can embrace our brokenness and our pain, where we can acknowledge our sin and humanity, where we can let the love of Jesus Christ fill our lives with hope and meaning and purpose and direction and joy. If, as Anne Lamott states, the grace of God is glue, then only the broken can be mended. And only we who are willing to say that we are broken, like that tax collector, can find that spiritual sanctuary that God has made for us. Many prayers are said in worship every Sunday and on days of the week. Some of them are spoken, and some of them, as we know, are silent. But no prayer can be heard that does not begin with the words of that pitiful, embarrassed, humiliated tax collector. God, be merciful to me, a sinner. And on this Reformation Sunday, may his prayer be our prayer. Prayer that reforms our lives into the life that Christ has made for us to live. If we will let Christ chisel away at our hearts and glue back together through his grace and love our brokenness. Praise be to our Lord Jesus Christ, now and forevermore.